Howdy, y'all! I'm Rissy, and I review things. Normally, I review skincare and makeup, but today I thought I'd try something different. I figured that, with times being what they are, it might be kind of fun to escape into the world of fantasy. So I'm gonna do a book review while I do my first ever Get Ready With Me video. And for the book, actually it's gonna be 2.5 books, I'm gonna do Patrick Rothfuss's celebrated fantasy classics, The Kingkiller Chronicle. Yes, that's right. The Name of the Wind, The Wise Man's Fear, and The Slow Regard of Silent Things. I love fantasy. It's my absolute favorite literary genre. Spoiler alert, I'm gonna be doing like a very in-depth review, so obviously talking about a lot of things that happen in the book, which will give away a lot of the plot stuff. So if you hate spoilers and you plan on reading these books, you should probably not watch any further. Although it has been 6 years since the last one was published. But of course, in order to get ready, I have to have a bare face, so now the magic of YouTube. Behold! My true face. No makeup or anything. I'm a little shy about, this. It's my first time and I'm glad you all were here for it. You can make it special for me. Apologies if any of the makeup application is a little bit rough because obviously I'm gonna have to take off my glasses to do that. So I have a little hand mirror and I have viewfinder, my camera, obviously, but that's it. And of course I'll have to get in like about this close to actually like see myself. I have terrible vision. So yeah, let's get started. Let's prime. So where to begin with book review? I guess let's just start with a general overview of the Kingkiller Chronicle. Let me just start by saying that these books are overhyped garbage and they have very few redeeming features. Tell us how you really feel, Rissy. I hope I do not get like an army of Patrick Rothfuss stans all up in my comments because God, they are idiots. There's a subreddit for the Kingkiller Chronicles, obviously, and people can discuss, theories and the parts of the books they like, that sort of thing, and obviously everybody in there is a fan, and I really hope they're just a bunch of 12-year-olds because, there was this one post that it was titled, "Are these books actually bad?" One of the fans had their confidence shaken by a negative review and was complaining that, this reviewer hated all of the parts of the book that I liked. Does that make them bad? And then all the stans stormed in and were like, no, if you like a thing, it is objectively good, as long as that thing is the Kingkiller Chronicle books by Patrick Rothfuss. And I'm like, that is quite the tautology you've constructed there. So again, I hope they're just teenage boys, which is really who these books were written for. So that's the biggest problem with these books, and we're gonna get real in-depth here, is that they are marketed for adults, but they are not. There's an adaptation that's been in the works for several years now, and Showtime passed on it, and that was very wise of them, because these books are not for grown-ups. The only network, if there's gonna be an adaptation, that these should be on is the CW. Even though there's a lot of pretty dark stuff in the books, all of the characters behave like they are teenagers. And of course, the lead character himself, Kvothe, is a teenager for most of the story. Of course, there's the framing device, right? That Kvothe, older, wiser, sadder Kvothe, is telling his story to the chronicler, hence Kingkiller Chronicles. But we don't really spend that much time with Kvothe in his old form. And it's also important to note that the way old Kvothe behaves, he's so, world-weary, and he's just waiting to die. He ought to be, 300 years old. He went into hiding and changed his name as a result of doing something that has apparently caused, a worldwide catastrophe to happen. He killed a king, apparently, of some kind, hence the title The Kingkiller Chronicles, and he is known as Kvothe Kingkiller. And you would think with how legendary a figure he is, that he'd be 300 years old, that somehow he's become immortal due to his magic powers or his trafficking with the fairyland, the fae creatures and whatnot who are immortal. There's also some theories that Kvothe himself has fairy blood, which would explain a lot, like his fucking color-changing eyes, amongst other things. So he's so world-weary because he's immortal, and yet he wants to die, he can't end his existence. Contour. I should also note that, like, as far as the world goes, this is a pre-industrial society. There is no form of mass communication. There's certainly no form of long-distance mass communication. The magic isn't like, you know, Harry Potter, where you can teleport. As far as I can tell, nobody can do that shit except for some of the magically powerful bad guys. So yeah, there's no real way of disseminating information over long distances at a very rapid rate. You would think that because Kvothe is a legendary figure like Robin Hood or King Arthur, that he would have to be like fucking 300 years old. I don't know why that number is stuck in my head, but let's say at least 100, right? It takes time in pre-industrial societies for legends to form. No, Kvothe is 25 in the framing device of the story. He's 25, he acts like he's a million years old, and all he wants to do is die, and his legend has spread to like all four corners of the civilized world. That is not how legends work. That is not how this shit goes, okay? We know how much time it takes for legends to spread. Kvothe being 25 makes absolutely no sense, especially when you take into account that the catastrophic thing that happened was 2 years in the past. So the story obviously is set like there's the present time of the story, which is when Kvothe is 25 and super world weary, and then there's all of his story which is told in flashback. The catastrophe was apparently 2 years before he went into hiding. So he was 23 when he did the last, you know, super impressive thing in his life. 23 years old. Yeah, the story in flashback goes from when he was a toddler all the way up through when the story actually really gets going, which is when he's like 12. So yeah, this is a complete ignorance of just how folklore, how legends work, also like how time progresses and how it's supposed to progress in books. Once Kvothe gets to the magical Harry Potter but with fucking university he goes to learn about magic, less than 2 full years passes over the span of 2 gigantic doorstopper 1,000-page books. So somehow in the 3rd book, which is never gonna get published, by the way, you'd have to condense all the remaining like 7 years of Kvothe's life into that one book. The plot of these books is basically, well, you know, so you have the framing story. Kvothe is telling his life story to the chronicler, relating all of his exploits and how he came to be this world-striding legend. And he's promised that he's gonna tell, like, the real truth behind all his stories. And this is the big thing that Patrick Rothfuss's fans will say, that Rothfuss is playing with all these fantasy tropes that are popular, like, in typical fantasy novels, and he's turning all of that upside down because he's showing you what it's like behind the scenes to be a hero of legend. And to that, I say fucking bullshit. That is not remotely true. It kind of is in the first book. So the first book is the best. Name of the Wind is by far the best thing Patrick Rothfuss ever wrote. Apparently, it took him like 10 years to write, although I suspect he started writing it when he was like a teenager, just because so much of it reads like just, you know, young adult teen drama. But in the first one, you actually do get to see Kvothe, as he's telling the chronicler about his stories, explain, oh, well, everybody says in these songs that they're constantly writing about me because I'm so fucking badass that I did X deed. And the truth is actually that I cheated. One of the big plot points in the first book is him getting admitted to the Magic University at the age of 15, which is really young, and doing it without a letter of recommendation, really overcoming his terrible circumstances in order to do so. And he reveals that the part of how he did it is not just being super, super smart and homeschooled. It's by sneaking into the auditorium where basically all the students are having to sort of audition for admittance to the university, and watching several hours worth of other students going through this process, memorizing the answers to the questions they were being asked. And that's really good. So credit where credit is due. That part of the book is fucking hilarious, because on one hand, it's like, yes, Kvothe is very clever, but like his primary strength is his cunning and his guile, and we see him using that to overcome really bad life circumstances since he'd spent the previous years being a fucking Dickensian street urchin in a shithole town, and now he's like on the absolute top of his game, and he had to really come from behind. So that's cool, right? And actually is one of the only times when this whole like, well, he's playing with the tropes, he's not playing it straight. That happens like several times in the first book, and then pretty much stops cold in the second book. Now, the basically inciting incident that puts Kvothe on the path to his hero's journey is that there's a really powerful group of supernatural beings that are totally fucking evil for evil's own sake. Apparently, there's evil for the lulz. And they are called the Chandrian. There are 7 of them, and Kvothe's parents, who are traveling entertainers, wrote a song about them and used some of their true names, their secret names, and that's like a big thing in these books. And the Chandrian were able to hear their names and track down Kvothe's parents and killed them, brutally murdered the shit out of them and their whole traveling group. Kvothe, of course, is the only survivor of this, and obviously he vows revenge, and the whole direction of his life is he's gonna find out all the information he can about the Chandrian and then destroy them somehow, even though the whole thing is they're immortal and they can't be killed. One of them, their leader, Haliax, which sounds a lot like Halifax, he specifically, can't die. He wants to die, but he can't die. For some reason. We don't know. And so it's well, you're gonna have a hell of a time with this kid. I think that happens when Kvothe is 12. That spurs him to go on to find the university so that he can get access to information about these beings. The Chandrian, murdering his parents and his whole, theater troupe is really good. The writing in that is great. It's actually very sad and moving when he's telling the chronicler I hope my parents enjoyed their last few moments together before disaster struck. I hope they spent that time just enjoying each other's company, and him choosing to fondly remember his parents, as they were in love with each other and very happy. That's good. And then the Chandrian themselves are pretty fucking spooky. They're kind of classic supernatural evil bad guys. They're all weird looking. That's the main plot of the story, or at least it should be, is Kvothe's desire to avenge himself upon the Chandrian for the deaths of his parents. Cool. Very simple, right? That's kind of a bog standard fantasy plot. My parents are dead. Kvothe now is kind of like Batman. And, this could have had the potential to be a really good story where Kvothe is some kind of anthropologist who's tracking down these legendary beings, trying to isolate the truth from these ancient legends, because these things, the Chandrian, they're thousands of years old. And that would have been a really cool fucking series of books. But unfortunately, it's not just Kvothe, the determined young man, out to avenge his parents, right? It is Kvothe, the hero of legend, doing this. The biggest badass of all time. That is the sticking point of these books. They're several different stories jammed in to each other. I'm probably going to say that a million times, this is the real problem with these books, and what that means is not that I'm that indecisive, it's just that these books have a lot of terrible problems with them. And remember that thing I said about how the story really progresses only about 2 years in those giant books? Yeah, there's a lot of fucking filler material here. Rothfuss overwrites almost everything. Kvothe goes to the Magic University, and it's really important to note that he's fucking 15 when this happens, and that the average age for entrance in the university is 20. 20 years old. These books should have been written like Doogie Howser, MD, right? Where you have Kvothe, who's a kid, he's been living under starvation conditions. It would really stunt his development, so he'd be short and skinny. So he's not just 15, he's 15 and he's gonna look like a fucking kid compared to all these 20-year-olds. Keep that in mind for when I describe how all of the most beautiful women in the university are always throwing themselves at him, because he's 15. Gross. We don't actually know what the age of consent is in this corner of Kvothe's world. He goes to the university and he is the smartest. He's the best at everything. He learns how to do magic. I figure I need a hand mirror to get my eyeliner done. Even before he went to university, when he was still just traveling around with his family, he was the smartest child prodigy ever. Both literally overhears his parents talking about how extraordinary he is, and his father jokingly asks his mother if she actually banged a god. Yeah, that's Patrick Rothfuss's level of wish fulfillment. Like, oh, you were a disappointment to your dad? Well, my fantasy version of myself. Like, my dad asks mom if I'm actually a fucking demigod because I'm that fucking awesome. Jesus Christ. But I would have been okay with, like, Kvothe the child prodigy if he weren't a physical powerhouse. That would be great. Again, it would be a story about this short, skinny kid trying to go up against these ancient, eternal monsters with nothing more than the power of his mind. That would have made for a pretty great set of stories, right? Well, too bad that's not the stories we actually fucking get. Kvothe is also a musician. His music is like the most important thing. He plays the lute and he writes songs, although he hates poetry. And I'm pretty sure that this is a weird thing about Patrick Rothfuss, is that he loves music and he hates poetry. Motherfucker, what do you think a song is? A song is just poetry with some music on top. This happens, I don't know, 20 times in the book where Kvothe will mention, both in the framing story and as a teenager, how much he hates poetry and how poets are shitty and being a poet is like the worst thing ever. And I'm like, Patrick Rothfuss, I hope the ghost of E.E. Cummings shits in your mouth while you sleep at night. Poetry is awesome. Kvothe has always been a little genius, and then when he gets to university, everybody thinks he's the best. Why anyone would want to hang out with a 15-year-old unless they were just taking pity on him? I don't know. There's nobody else there that's his age. There's all these crazy hot women constantly throwing themselves at him. Crazy hot 20-year-old women. I'm like, this is illegal. I don't feel okay about this. He makes enemies with another dude named Ambrose, who's very wealthy and a total asshole and is a dipshit to everybody. And Kvothe is always besting him in the series of pranks. Does this sound familiar? Does it sound like fucking Harry Potter? Because it is. Except that, imagine if Draco Malfoy were 5 to 6 years older than Harry Potter. How weird would that have been? There's no reason why Ambrose should give any shits about Kvothe, because Kvothe is 15. But there has to be a fucking Draco Malfoy character so that Kvothe can have something to do while he's at university besides be the smartest person on earth. And so we get stuck with that shit. And it takes up so much time. So much time is wasted on this bullshit, on his petty high school rivalry. By the way, the books are called the Kingkiller Chronicle, right? Ambrose, the bully, is in the line of royal succession. So the theory is that he's gonna end up becoming the king, and that's the king that Kvothe kills. And this is my tinfoil hat theory as to why the third book is never going to get published, because all of Patrick Rothfuss's fans have deduced his original plot, that Ambrose will become king of Ventus, and Kvothe will have to kill him. He's mean to Kvothe, so that means he must die. And that somehow sets off like a war, like mutually assured destruction is happening all over the place, and that's why the world sucks in the future. But of course, if the climax of your series of books is the main character killing his high school bully, that sucks. That sucks and it's stupid. And so a lot of fans are like, no, surely that won't happen because Patrick Rothfuss is a fucking genius. He would never do that to us. When really Patrick Rothfuss, like, that was his plan all along. And so he psyched himself out so badly because it's like, well, what the fuck do I do? This was my plan, and he can't really change it. And so that is why I think the third book will never be published. Rothfuss is worse than George R.R. Martin, who he also steals from shamelessly. People are like, oh, these books are so new and so different. They're nothing like regular fantasy. No, they're exactly like regular fantasy. They're the Wheel of Time plus Harry Potter with some scenes stolen from George R.R. Martin, and then a smattering of Lord of the Rings. That's it. It's all very bog standard fantasy. Let's discuss Patrick Rothfuss's writing style, which is oftentimes praised as being so rich and poetic and, so beautiful. I can tell you one thing about Patrick Rothfuss's writing style. He definitely knows how to write one-handed. He is so horny writing these books. There is so much time spent describing the titties of every female character that walks by. He's a 15-year-old, okay, fine, so he's super horny. Although, maybe it would have been better for the books if he hadn't been 15, just the thought. And the thing is, unlike most 15-year-olds, grown-ass women are super attracted to him. So the second book is where everything goes horribly wrong. This is where Patrick Rothfuss stops playing with tropes, right? He's not doing that anymore, and just leans all the way into Kvothe being the hero of legend. And one of the things he does is there's this magical fairy woman named Felurian, which is the second good name in the books, or an author who writes like about the importance of stories and language. Patrick Rothfuss cannot make up names for shit. There's two good names. Kvothe is a pretty good name, it's very unusual. And then Felurian is good. It sounds like allure, and it also sounds like feline, which she definitely is, kind of cat-like. So those are good names. Everything else is garbage. He has a bunch of British peasant-sounding names, and they're almost always the same. There's like Bill and Will, only he'll like make it so that it only has one L instead of two, because it's a fantasy novel, I guess. And then there's always like one old guy in the yokel villages, and they have a name that starts with C. So there's an old cob and there's an old cupper. Like, does he cup balls? What is he doing? Oh, that old cupper, he's at it again. Cupping them balls. So in the second book, Kvothe is taken into fairyland by chasing after this beautiful fairy queen, and she is reputed to lure men into her clutches and then she fucks them to death or drives them insane. And obviously that can't happen to our hero, so Kvothe, who by the way is a virgin, has never so much as touched a boob or kissed a girl, goes chasing after Felurian, goes into her realms, and just bangs the living shit out of her, like, non-stop. He's so impressive that she's like, there's no way you could be a virgin, my Kvothe. You were like a summer storm. That's an actual line in the book. You are like a summer storm. And this is when it becomes clear that, like, this is just teenage boy wish fulfillment. Like, yeah, the first time you have sex, it's not just with a sexy older lady, it's with a sexy fairy goddess lady who normally fucks men to death, and she tells you, you were so good, you were like a summer storm. How anyone says these books are good is beyond me. So then he continues his quest, and he learns how to become a fucking ninja from a group of mysterious ninja people who have East Asian style martial arts, even though they're all blonde, so he has to learn their mysterious ways. Also, he has sex with the hottest female members of the sex ninjas, and they don't have any, like, nudity taboos. Kvothe is doing his ninja training, and he gets really horny, and his teacher, his female teacher, notices that he's got a giant raging stiffy, and is like, oh, do you need me to take care of that for you? And he's like, oh, I couldn't. She's like, oh, but we must. You know, you shouldn't be distracted. It's so bad. Kvothe's incessant horniness ruins huge chunks of the story, and because it's Rothfuss, he overwrites everything. So we have like chapter upon chapter upon chapter of Kvothe being a fucking horny idiot. Only, unlike most 15-year-old horny idiots, he definitely lays pipe with pretty much everyone. Any female characters that he doesn't have sex with still want to have sex with him. Anytime these criticisms come up, fans of the book will be like, well, you don't understand. Like, Rothfuss is playing with these tropes. No, he's not. He's playing it really straight. It gets brought up that, oh, well, Kvothe is an unreliable narrator. He's lying to the chronicler. If it were just the first book, that would actually kind of make sense, because there's a point when 12-year-old Kvothe is listening to an old storyteller named Scarpy. Scarpy says, basically like turning directly to the camera and says, like, you have to lie a bit to make a good story. A lot of people have used that as evidence that Kvothe is being an unreliable narrator. Well, okay. But then in the second book, you learn that Kvothe is actually being more truthful with the chronicler than he's been with his best friend and fairy companion, Bast, who is, by the way, the worst character in the books. Old Kvothe, old 25-year-old Kvothe, has a dude named Bast who is accompanying him, is a fae creature. We don't know how they met. That will presumably be covered in the third book, although there's a lot of theories that Bast is Kvothe and Felurian's son, which would be horrible, but whatever. There's certain things that Kvothe has never told Bast about, and we find that out when Kvothe tells one of these stories to the chronicler, and Bast loses his fucking mind. Bast, by the way, so he's this fairy creature, and he calls Kvothe Rissy. I hate that word. It sounds weebish. It sounds like a white person's attempt to, like, make a constructed language based on Japanese. And Bast is always whining like he's 5 years old. Rissy, I don't like eating beets. Rissy, I'm worried about you. It sounds like a fucking weeb thing, and I hate it. So Bast sucks and loses his mind when he finds out that Kvothe never told him about this encounter with a scary evil tree that he had while he was in the Feywild with Felurian. The evil tree, by the way, is my favorite character because it fucks with Kvothe. It's like one of the only beings in this series that doesn't worship at Kvothe's feet and tell him how awesome he is. This is how we find out that Kvothe is actually being more truthful with the Chronicler than he has with even his closest companion. So why on earth would we think that he is being an unreliable narrator? Here's the kicker. We're 2.5 books in. So let's say in the 3rd book, there's a giant reveal that, yeah, Kvothe has been lying his ass off, that he's never actually touched a boob in his life. All that stuff is just made up. Well, we still had to read it in the first fucking place. We had to endure chapter after chapter after chapter of Kvothe's inner monologue talking about titties. And also, that would mean a huge chunk of the 3rd book would have to be spent correcting all of the lies in the story. So we having to go back over the plot points. And this is already a problem. Like in the 2nd book, a lot of the plot is just a rehash of shit that happened in the 1st book, especially all the stuff that Kvothe is doing at the university. Rothfuss's writing style is praised. Well, I've told you how that's garbage. One of the hot female characters is dating a guy that's not Kvothe, although she used to have a huge crush on Kvothe because obviously she's female and therefore must be crushing on him hardcore. And in front of her boyfriend, who's Kvothe's best friend, she says this, and this was the point, I almost threw this book out the window. I hated this line so much. Since I suffered, now you have to. But since you came back, it's almost physical, Fella said. Now, when you look at me, there's something happening behind your eyes. Something all sweet fruit, shadows, and lamplight. Something wild that fairy maidens run from underneath a violet sky. It's a terrible thing, really. I like it. Puke! Barf! God! That's not how people talk to each other. That's not how anybody would describe someone else. Like sweet fruit, shadows, and lamplight. I can't. Even with these shitty books. Oh god. The writing is terrible. The characters are terrible. Oh, and anything about the Chandrian, the evil supernatural beings, they should be the focus point of the story, and yet they're barely in it. Apparently all they do is just find people who sing songs about them and kill them. That's the source of their villainy, which obviously that's good enough for Kvothe to want to get revenge, but well, what else do they actually do that's bad? Nothing. So I'm like, are they really villains? Apparently they did a lot of real nasty shit like back in the early days of the world, but in terms of what they're doing now, it doesn't seem to be much of anything. Like, one of them is leading a bandit gang that Kvothe happens upon, and they've been robbing and killing tax collectors. I guess that's not great, but it's also not amazing Darth Vader style villainy, right? There's only 2 of them that we actually know anything about, you know, over the course of 2 books. There's 7 of them altogether. That's it. That's all we get is they fucking kill people who sing about them. Oh noes. Terrible villains gonna destroy the whole fucking world, which is apparently their goal, but they don't seem to be actively working towards that very much. And every time, like, the book starts to focus on Kvothe learning about the Chandrian, something happens, and then it just becomes about Kvothe being horny again. I think that's all the makeup. And pretty much all I have to say about the books. They're bad, and if somebody tries to tell you otherwise, it's a damn lie from the pit of hell. If they're like a teenage boy, well, at least you can understand, man, putting my hair up in like that clip really warped it. Where are my glasses? This is the final look. I hope you like it. It's a huge relief to have my glasses on again. That's the Kingkiller Chronicles. If you like this video, give it a like, and I'd be happy to do more book review style Get Ready With Me's. Maybe take people's minds off of what's going on in the world today, and until next time, bye y'all!